Hello and welcome to the Windows Active Directory Expert. If you're new to this channel, kindly go ahead and subscribe the channel, like the videos, and share the video link with someone who really wants to scale up in the Active Directory. In the previous session, we have seen like how we can provide or delegate the appropriate permissions to the users and group, and I showed you the appropriate step that we can take place in order to provide the permission or delegation to the users to perform certain task in the Active Directory. So in this recording session, I'm going to cover the Active Directory partitions, like what all partitions we have in the Active Directory. I will be explaining the overview of those partitions, and I will be demonstrating you those partitions as well, like where those partitions are available, how we can check them, and yeah, that's all I think. So let's begin the today's demonstration. So if I open the NMS Notepad, so you can see here I did mention the ntds.dit, which is your Active Directory database file. So while the time of DC promotion, there are two folders by default created, ntds and sysvol. Ntds folder is to keep your all Active Directory database file. I mean, not all database file, but all of the relevant Active Directory, files into that particular folder, where you will see the ntds.dit file as well, which is your jet database file of the Active Directory. And apart of the ntds.dit, you will see some other logs file as well with respect to the Active Directory of our Active Directory. And the other folder that is by default created is sysvol, which is your by default share in the environment, and which contains the is your net logon script, your GPT template, which is group policy template, in order to apply the policy to the users or the domain controller. So let's I'll show you this ntds.dit. So in the interview, right, it's very common that they ask you like what is the location for the ntds.dit. And earlier, this ntds.dit by default location was under the system32, but now it has been changed. And wherever you want, right, while the installation of Active Directory, you can browse the location. And the best practices is that you keep the ntds folder and sysvol folder in the different drive. So not in C drive, because there is huge chance that if there is a problem with the Windows, that machine will be crashed out, right? And you will be end up losing the Active Directory database file and the sysvol folder. So you have to open the C drive and go to Windows. So this is going to be your by default location when you promote the Active Directory in the environment. So just a second, if I'll click on any of the folder and search for the ntds. Okay, so now you can see here it is better to take the screenshot as well as I'm demonstrating you everything. Go to ntds folder, just double click on the ntds folder. You will be able to see there are a lot of files inside the ntds.dit. So pardon me guys, seems my laptop is bit slow, but that's all right. If I go all the way up. So okay, so it seems that it's having some slowness problem, but let me do one thing. Let me log into the another domain controller which I have, and I'll try to show you the database file over on this computer. So I go into the C drive, then I go to Windows, and from here if I search for the NTDS, so under the NTDS, I don't know, it's NTDS. Okay, so you can see under the NTDS folder, I got edb.check, edb log, edb, so edb temp, ntds.date, and temp.edb. So sometime in the interview, right, interviewer ask you like what all the files being created under the ntds folder as well. So just keep in mind and take a screenshot of this file, and be just a kind of brainstorm yourself and remember it, so that if any interviewer asks you like what all files is being created while the Active Directory promotion under the entity is, so you must be aware of these logs files and the database files. So you can see here that we have ntds.dit, which is the Active Directory database file, and its size of 24 MB. So I'll tell you the very interesting story behind it. Okay. So what happened is, like when the Active Directory introduced in the Windows NT, okay, we all know like Active Directory was introduced in the with the Windows NT. So earlier what happened is like there was no database file were available. There was no any NTDS file were available for the Active Directory database. So what all the Active Directory information, object details and everything were storing in the registry key, HKLM key, which were maximum you can store up to 1020 kilobyte, which is KB, only 1020 kilobyte, and you can't go after that. Okay, so this is the maximum size of the Active Directory database in the registry HKLM. But what happened is like as you can see nowadays, like every organization, we have small organization and we have big organization as well. So the big organization where we have multiple domain controllers, users, resources, everything is huge. So this option, right, that NT Windows Active Directory was not feasible for them because that maximum can store up to 1024 kilobyte. So what Microsoft does is like they have been introduced the ntds.dit for the Active Directory database file. This is very feasible, and this is, I mean, every does irrespective of the organization size, they can store the information, they can store the huge data inside the ntds.dit, right? Okay, so hope I'm clear with this story behind this ntds.dit to introduced. All right, so this Active Directory database file, right? Ntds.dit consists of five partitions. This particular entities.dit consists of five partitions. The first partition is schema partition, your configuration partition, application partition, and domain partition. And there is one more partition, so we called global catalog partition. So by default, if you promote any domain controller, the first domain controller in the domain or in the environment, that domain controller is by default your global catalog domain controller. Okay, that is by default global catalog. And what is the story behind it? Why does this Microsoft chosen to not make one domain controller, the first domain controller, as a global catalog? I will explain that in the later session maybe. Okay, so we got schema partition, configuration, as I mentioned, application partition, and domain partition. So let me try to overview, give the overview explanation of these partitions that we have, and then I'll show you, I'll demonstrate you like using what utility, what option you can check these partitions in the Active Directory. So first of all, like the FISMO role, don't get confused. FISMO role is different, and your naming contest, these naming contest is different. Don't be confused, because I've seen that a lot of mine friend are so confused in between these FISMO roles and the configuration roles. I mean the Active Directory partitions role. So let me start the explanation of the schema. Schema and configuration, these two are the forest wide partitions. Let me repeat that again. Schema partition and the configuration partition, these two partitions are the forest wide partitions. Means if you have let me open the another MS Paint so that I can explain you in better manner. So suppose you got the contoso.com and then you got the child domain controller, you got the tree root, tree domain controller, like that. So you have the parent child trust. Okay. So if I click under this contoso.com, okay, contoso.com, and then I type here mail.contoso.com, or let me type in here the iit.contoso.com. Okay. So your schema partition, schema partitions, schema partition, your schema partition and your configuration partitions, these partitions are the forest fight. Means these two partitions would be replicating across all the domain. Okay, because we got three domain, right? Contoso.com, which is root domain, mail.contoso.com, which is child domain, iit.contoso.com, which is child domain. So we got three domains in a row. So these two partitions will be replicating across all the domain, like from mail in mail.contoso, in iit.contoso. So if you make any changes in the schema partition, it will be replicating to all the domain controller, to all the domain in the environment. And same goes for the configuration partition as well. So as schema, we discussed about the Fismo role before. So schema store the information of the attributes and the classes. Okay, it's a kind of blueprint for the objects. It's a blueprint for the objects. Means in a schema you will have all the attributes information and the classes. How you can check that? In this schema you have to, if you have not seen my previous video, go and see. I demonstrated you the command using which you can register the schema DLL. Otherwise you won't be able to see the schema in GUI mode, graphical user interface. So if I'll go under the, if I'll open the MMC, type MMC into the run. Okay, click on file, add, remove. Okay, from here you can see we have a schema, but this option Active Directory schema of, console will only be available when you register the schema DLL. Okay, I clicked on OK. If I, okay, it's taking some time. Let me go to the file, add snap in. Under the schema, if I add here, if I click here, okay, now you can see that I got this Active Directory schema console. So you can see here that we have classes, account, and we have so many classes here in the classes container, right? You can see here. And then we got the attributes, like what all attributes we have and we can use in the Active Directory. So there are two types of attributes. So I'll explain that in the separate session. So this way you will be able to see the Active Directory schema attributes and classes from this console. So moving on to the next partition, which is configuration partition. So configuration partition is basically keep the information of your site and services, your site's information, your subnet informations, your overall replication topology. Everything is being taken care by, or I would say inside the configuration partition. So let me demonstrate you like how you can check the configuration partition. So there is nothing tricky about these steps, all easy. Go to run, type here ADSI edit, sorry, edit. Take a screenshot up, guys, this ADSI edit, because this is very important tool in order to view certain information which you won't be able to view from the DSA, Active Directory uses in computers console or some other console. So click on OK. So from here, if I already connected that, so let me do one thing. Let me remove this partition so that I can show you from the beginning. So if I'll click on the ADSI edit connect, so you can see here. So by default, it will connect the domain partition. I will be that domain partition explanation is coming up. So bear with me. So here, right, under select a well-known naming contest. So if I'll click here, I got this configuration partitions. If I'll click OK, if I double click on this server name configuration partition, and under this services, under the sites, okay. So from here, you will be able to see like how many sites you have, okay. What is default site, inter-site topology, your overall subnet, how many subnets you have attached. Since I don't have, I got only 2 sites, so I have very less information over here. All right, so this way you will be able to see the informations about the configuration, what configuration partition contains. And these configuration partitions replicate across the domain controller. Means this is the forest wide rule and it has to be replicated across all the domain controller in the environment. Okay, so hope the schema and configuration partition is pretty clear for you guys. So let me move to the application partition. Application partition is basically you can think of like while the promotion of the Active Directory, right? We select the DNS installation as well. Like DNS option we select because in the dependency I showed you like how critical your DNS is. If your DNS is not working, then your Active Directory will not be working anymore. Okay, so to Active Directory to function properly, you must have the DNS server up and running. So there are two types of DNS we can build in the environment. The first one is the standalone, or the second one is the AD integrated Active Directory. So in the AD integrated Active Directory, so while the time of promoting domain controller, you have an option whether you want that domain controller to be as a DNS server, or you have the privilege, you have the option. If you have a standalone DNS server, then you can check that option simply that hey, I got the DNS server already and I don't want to have the AD integrated zone, AD integrated DNS server. So if I'll talk about the recommendations, so Microsoft always recommend to have the AD integrated zone. Reason behind it, because when you promote the Active Directory, there are a lot of SRV records populated in the Active Directory. So those are the dynamically placed in the different places in the into the DNS server, your AD integrated DNS server, and those are SRV records are very important in order for Active Directory to work. So for that purpose, right, for that purpose, Microsoft has decided or kind of notified the recommendation, or tell everyone the recommendation that this is very it is must, it is nice to have the AD integrated zone, AD integrated DNS server, despite of having the standalone DNS server in the environment. So application partition basically keep the informations of your DNS, okay, DNS, and if you have exchange server, so those information is being taken care or kept into the application partitions. So bear with me, I will be showing you the you know those application in my environment as well. Now let's move on to hope that application partition is pretty clear for you. If not, then I would encourage you to go on the Google and search for application partitions more. Okay. So now let's jump into the another partitions that we have. And one more thing I would like to mention that your application partition and domain partition, these two are the domain wide partition. Okay, so from the in the application partition, half of the application partition is domain wide and half of the application partition is forest wide. I'm specifically talking about the AD integrated DNS, because your there are two application partition for DNS. The first one is forest, DNS forest zone, which gets replicated across all the domain, and there is another domain DNS zone which get replicated within the domain. So just keep in mind. And there is another, the last, I would say, last not but not least, this is domain partition, which basically keep the information of the object environment in the environment, like computer, your user, your printer, whatever there inside the Active Directory users and group. Those information is within the domain partitions. Those informations are within the domain partitions, and this is domain wide role, so it does not replicate to all domain in the environment. When I'm saying all domain in the environment, means if the domain partition is there for the contoso, that domain partition will not be replicating to the mail.contoso and iit.contoso.com. Just keep in mind. Now let's move on to the global catalog partition. So global catalog partition is basically a forest wide partition. So it just keep the information of the pass attribute. It's partial attribute set. So it keep the information of the pass attributes. If I'll go into the next, yeah, if you can see here in this slide, if I have the resource, if I have the shared, or I would say some application hosted on the my root domain, which is contoso.com, and I'm here in the mail.contoso.com. My user1, if user1 will try to log in into the application which is hosted on the contoso.com, how this user particular knows, or this domain, how that this particular domain controller knows that this user is within my forest? He will never know, right? So DZ global catalog, you know, does the life easier for the administrator. GC, we called it in simple term GC, short form of the global catalog. So global catalog is basically keep the information of the domain partitions, or I would say it's a partial attribute set. It keep the information of partial attribute set, means whatever the users objects are there in the domain, global catalog will keep the information of those objects in the partial domain controller. If the GC is enabled in the contoso.com, so this particular domain GC would have the information of all the objects for mail.contoso and for iit.contoso. So hope this is pretty clear for you. So let me jump into, so I showed you like how you can see the partitions, schema partitions, but let me, and I demonstrated you the configuration partition as well. So I will show you the application partition and the domain partitions real quick. If I go into the ADSI edit again, right click, because I connected the configuration partition. If I right click here, connect, and from here, right, I'll select the default naming context, which is my domain partition. So if I click on the domain partition, okay, so you can see here I got my all the OUs, users, everything here under the domain partition. So if I open the, and these how they are replicating across all the domain, I will show you. If I'll click on the CMD, if I click on the CMD, oh sorry, let me maximize it. So if I click rep admin slash show REPL, okay, so now you can, I'll copy it and I'll show you one by one like how the partitions are how all partitions are getting replicated. And I would encourage you to please perform in your lab as well, so that you will have a great understanding about the partitions. So as soon as I run this rep admin show repl command, so whatever the inbound replication of this particular domain has, it will try to get the replication status. So you can see default site first name, this particular domain controller is under this default first site name. DSA is IS underscore GC, site option none, DSA object and invocation ID. I will be covering these two when I will be recording the replication troubleshooting and replication explanations recording. So if I'll see under the inbound neighbors, I can see this contoso equal to contoso, oh sorry, DC is equal to contoso, and then DC is equal to com. This is your domain partition which is getting replicated to mail.dc via RPC. You can see here. Then you can see the configuration partition is getting replicated for contoso.com to mail.mail.dc via RPC. You can see here. Then you can see schema is getting replicated partition. Schema partition is getting replicated to whom? Mail.dc via RPC. Now you can see DC domain DNS zone contoso.com via RPC to mail.dc. And now I explain you, right? Half of your application for application partition for DNS are the forest wide and half of the domain wide. When I'm saying half of the, that means your domain DNS zone, which is the domain wide. It just get replicate within the domain, but your forest DNS zone get replicated across all the domain in the environment. So this is the forest wide role for DNS. And then we have the, so now we cover about the contoso.com configuration, your domain partition configuration schema, domain DNS, forest DNS, and this is back replicating from the, this is again the domain partition for mail.contoso. So this way you will be able to see like how your partitions are getting replicated across all the domain. To check the partial set of attributes via global catalog, so you can either check it from the command, or I'll show you the GUI option, right? So if you wanted to see some global catalog information for the different domain, so you have to do like this way. Yes, remove it, right click here in the ADSI edit, connect, and under the advanced, right, you have to paste the naming context of that domain. Okay, so suppose this one. If I go under the advanced, here we need to choose global catalog 3268, 3268 and 3269. 3268 is global catalog non-secure port number and 3269 is secure port number. I'll click here. I'll click on OK. So now I connected the global catalog of the domain. DC is equal to contoso, DC is equal to com. For the domain contoso.com, I connected the GC partition. So same way, if you have the child domain in the environment, then you can go here, you can mention like this. So you can mention like mail.contoso.com and your port number 3268. So this sitting on contoso.com, you will be able to see what all attributes, what all information is there within this domain controller global catalog database. Okay, so since I don't have any child with the name of mail.contoso.com, so I will be getting the error. So that's all for today's session. So in this recording session, we discussed about the partitions and the overview explanation of the partition, what is global catalog, and what are the forest wide partitions and the domain wide partitions we have. I talked about the entities date file and some other files which are there into the entities folder. So in the next recording session, I will be walking you through the replication, troubleshooting, the live scenario, and how the replication overall replication flow works. So Thank you very much once again for coming to this channel. Again, if you're new to this channel, kindly go ahead and subscribe the channel. If you like the video, if you think that this particular video is informative for you, I would encourage you to like and share with someone who really wants to scale up in the Active Directory. Thank you very much, guys, and hope you have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.